Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we break down the week that was as the Mets take series against both the Marlins and the Padres. We take a look at where Francisco Alvarez is at, an inconsistent offense as the prospects continue to mash, and an early review of the Mets rotation. As always, we close out the show answering your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod on Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This spring, be transformed during the Cadillac Move Up sales event. This is your moment to step out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And here's a reminder to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And boy, do we have a lot to get through today because the Mets, since we last talked to you, have taken both series, one against the Marlins, one against the Padres, projected to be one of the best teams in all of baseball. So a nice bounce back here for the Mets, Joe. How we doing? How we feeling?
Feeling good. I mean, you win 2 series in a row. I wish I went to the home opener. I wish it was Thursday when it was 80 and sunny, and it magically got rained out. A little bit cold on Friday, but I'll tell you, a good few days of Mets baseball.
Yeah, it really was. And on the backs of, Tyler McGill showing out in these series, and the Mets offense a little bit inconsistent, but they had some big moments from the stars that we've been waiting for, whether it is Francisco Lindor or Pete Alonso, who has come out of the gate on a power tear for this team. So let's get right into it. We'll rewind back to the series against the Marlins. The Mets will not see Miami for a long time now, getting them in Miami out of the gate of the season, at home shortly after, and the Mets taking both of those series really on the backs of their pitching for the most part, Joe, it felt like. And we know Miami, they do have some pitching depth, so the offense didn't necessarily explode, but we did see a good effort in the first game, scoring 9 runs, 5 runs in the second game. The Mets, though, could not close out for the sweep.
Yeah, they couldn't close out for the sweep, but look, at the end of the day, I think it would be good if they could start to sweep some of these bad teams. And I think we'll see that as the season goes. But big picture, kind of the way you were talking, the offense inconsistency is something that's obviously sticking out here in the early going. But Tyler McGill looked fine on the home opener. Really liked what Kodai Senga brought to the table. I think he's electric. I love watching him pitch more than maybe I even thought I would. And a big shout to Max Scherzer. Did Scherzer pitch in the Miami series? I don't know why I'm drawing a blank.
Scherzer took game 1 against the Padres.
Okay. Yeah, so
in his best start of the year.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get to Scherzer then in a minute. But Kodai Senga, like you said, the pitching really stood out. And to me, Senga's out of the gates looking like that frontline potential guy that we hype that he could be in the offseason.
Yeah, really the theme of the Mets right now is that outside of Carlos Carrasco, their pitching depth has been tested. And for the most part, especially with Senga, who we felt was signed as this upside number 3 starter, and Tyler McGill, who wasn't even in the rotation when they got to spring training, they passed the test. We know Peterson has been up and down. Carrasco's been almost awful at this point where you're starting to get a little nervous about that one. But when you look at those rotation, especially with the bounce back from Max, which you knew was coming, when Verlander's back, you feel great about how the Mets could line up with Scherzer, Verlander, Senga, and the fact that they can get innings out of guys like McGill. You hope he stays healthy, somebody that's done this before in the month of April, and a guy like Peterson, because we don't expect a guy like Jose Quintana to be back until at least after the All-Star break as it stands. So if we've learned anything, it's that just because of a couple injuries to the front and back end of the rotation, the Mets will be able to survive it. But I think all eyes are on Carrasco. And when somebody gets healthy, is he going to be the first guy that gets bumped out? With how he's pitching, the velocity is down, the first inning struggles, long innings, and just hard contact off of him, Joe.
Right now, Carrasco's first pitch strike percentage is down about 15 to 20% from what it typically has been over the last 4 years of his career. And at this stage, Carlos Carrasco does not have the stuff to overcome being down in the count consistently. So he needs to find a way to get those first pitch strikes, try to reduce the hard contact, because he's not getting bad luck here. The ball is getting smacked around on Carrasco. So far. So I think it's a great question, Connor. When Justin Verlander comes back, which it seems like that could be, maybe by the end of the month. I know Buck said earlier here on Wednesday that he has to do a bullpen session, then a rehab start, and then he should be able to be back. So they're going to work kind of around that schedule. When he's ready, I'm hard pressed to push Tyler McGill out of this rotation with the way he's pitched. And David Peterson's been a bit up and down. So if you do want to give Carrasco a little bit more of a leash, you could option Peterson down and give Carrasco a little bit more of a shot. But he's making it pretty difficult on the Mets to want to continue with him as a member of this rotation.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It'll be interesting to see how you use him if he's not in the rotation, right? Is Carrasco a guy that could even be effective in a long relief role? It's something that we don't know. You have to wonder, the pitch clock seems like it is affecting him with fatigue, the velocity dropping inning after inning. So maybe there is hope for him as a reliever. And when you bring up him or Peterson, the optimistic side is the only game the Mets lost in the Padres series. Well, Peterson gave you 5 2/3 innings of 2-run ball against a great lineup. So we were high on Peterson before the year. He didn't come out of the gate firing. He had some control issues, but we still have confidence that Peterson's a guy that will settle in. And I think the start against the Padres was encouraging, a game that really the Mets could have stole this game if it wasn't for the Xander Bogaerts home run in the 8th or 9th inning, the 2-run home run that really blew it open, because the Mets really gave Josh Hader a tough time in that inning. But before we fully get to the end of the series, great to see Max Scherzer in game 1. The Mets shut out the Padres in that game. Scherzer only gives 5 innings, which isn't much for him, but no earned runs. He struck out 6. And then the bullpen, you got to tip the cap here, Joe. The front end of the bullpen right now, John Curtis, maybe low-key, the unsung hero of this team through the start of the season. Drew Smith, a little inconsistent, but great in that game. David Robertson's been phenomenal. This combination at the end of games with David Robertson and Adam Ottavino, I believe it's going to at least get them to the deadline before they acquire a closer that's on the market to beef up the end of that bullpen. So listen, when the starters are still figuring it out of the gate, fatigue is an issue, pitch clock adjustment is an issue that correlates with fatigue. It's great when you have arms that can get you from inning 6 to inning 9. And that's what the Mets got against the Padres.
It's huge for me with Max Scherzer. I'll get to the bullpen in a second. With Scherzer, after the first couple starts, everyone was down, everyone was out. And is Max Scherzer cooked at 39 years old? And he came out and showed that's not the case. Did we get that vintage Max Scherzer start that I was seeking last week? No, but 5 innings, 1 hit, no runs, 6 strikeouts. He missed some bats. He did have a little control issues early on that led to his pitch count kind of rising. But I think it's a positive step for Max. And I think as we continue to trek forward, I do think those starts from Scherzer are coming. The velocity is right where it was last year. So there's no depreciating stuff like we talked about with Carrasco just a couple minutes ago. I think Max is going to be just fine. And the bullpen's been a huge bright spot. I mean, losing Edwin Diaz for most of the year, maybe the year, we'll see. He had those optimistic quotes today. Maybe we'll hear Narco in a playoff game or something. But
it's like Stone Cold interrupting the biggest
Yeah.
match of the year. Is what that feels like. That pop will be insane.
That's got to be one of the things that they don't announce the NLDS roster or something, and Diaz is hiding in the back, and then all of a sudden he just comes out in the 9th. They kick down the door. But David Robertson is filled in more than admirably, and Buck's using him the same way he used Diaz last year. On Wednesday's game, he brought David Robertson in at the end of the 7th because that was when the meat of the order was coming up. So that's clearly Buck's preferred high leverage reliever. And a shout out to Adam Ottavino for stepping up, because now he has to take the 9th inning when Robertson takes the 8th, and he slammed the door shut. Brooks Raley has looked good. Drew Smith, like you said, Connor, inconsistent. He's got to throw more strikes because he's missing bats. He's just missing the strike zone. John Curtis has been great. The bottom part of the bullpen has been a bit of a problem. Dennis Santana, the stuff is electric. He misses some bats, but him being in that game with the opportunity to give up that home run to Bogarts is a bit of a questionable decision. Why is Dennis Santana pitching in that specific spot? But overall, you can't be unhappy with the bullpen. I think the starting pitching has had its roller coasters here over the first couple of weeks, but I think the pitching is much less of a concern than I imagine the offense is to us and everybody listening to the show.
I think so. And I think when you look at the final game of the Padres series, so the Mets take 2 of 3 from the Padres, coming off a series where the Padres had just taken 3 of 4 against Atlanta. So this was it's early, not a statement series by the Mets, but an important series to get back on track. And the Mets were a team that, you know how they got over 100 wins last year? They were 18-4 in rubber games. This was their first rubber game of the year. You're up against Blake Snell, who, yes, the Mets have had success against, but this is a former Cy Young winner, and the Mets really made him work. We saw the power with Pete and Lindor, and on the other side, they get a good start from McGill. They get help from the bullpen, and the Mets ultimately close out the series, taking it. So here's my final thoughts on the weekend review right now, Joe. The Mets are 7-6. Last week's pod could have been the doom and gloom pod. Everybody said this team's terrible. It's the worst team that money could buy, all these different things. And I get the frustration. And the Mets have problems right now. There's no denying that. But right now they're 7-6. They coming into Wednesday, they had a team batting average that was just dreadful. I mean, 214, 319 on base percentage, 345 slugging. You could think whatever you want about the Mets. That is not this Mets lineup. They are better than that. And there are things that are frustrating me. I don't like watching Marcana bat in the 5-hole. And he finds himself with the bases loaded all the time, and we can't even get a sac fly. There are problems with the lineup. I totally understand that. But right now, when you look at it, I mean, Jeff McNeil batting 256, he's going to hit better than that. Lindor at 225, he's going to be fine. I think we're going to get some youngsters up here that are going to give this team a little boost, and we'll get into that. But ultimately, Joe, the Mets have their problems, but at the end of the day, this team is better than how they've performed, and they're going to be better offensively than how they've performed, and they're still sitting here with a 7-6 record.
I was talking on Twitter today with somebody here on Wednesday, and I was like, you look back to last year's team, everyone said it's the same team that they brought back. Well, this same offense last year, of course, we know how it ended at the end of the year. The offense struggled. The wild card series, the offense struggled. But this was a team that finished second in the league in average, second in the league in on-base percentage, sixth in the league in runs scored, sixth in the league in OPS. Do I think they can replicate that with the same offense again? I don't. But I also, to your point, Connor, I don't think this is a team that now is going to hit 215 as a team and be bottom of the barrel in almost all offensive categories, which is kind of where they are, where we stand here today on Wednesday. But look, it's going to be a little inconsistent, and you will get some young guys up, which that can also lead to a little more inconsistency in a way as they adjust to being in a big league lineup. But I think the upside of this offense hasn't been met yet. And that's not just you maybe get a little more out of Daniel Vogelback. You maybe get a little more out of Canna. You maybe get a little more out of Escobar. That's looking down the pike at some young guys that I think can come up and truly make an impact here for the stretch run. Because look, the Mets were kind of hot all year last year until the stretch run. So maybe it's a little reverse psychology this year.
And they have brought up Francisco Alvarez, really due to the Narvaez injury. Alvarez struggling early, 1 for 8 in the 2 games he's gotten to play in. It felt like the game kept finding him, Joe, in the middle of that series against the Padres. Game 2, he had some big moments. He pressed. It feels like he wasn't seeing the ball that well. He's chasing a little bit. I mean, this is a 21-year-old that the Mets clearly wanted in the minors for a lot of this year. The Mets have told you that, and an injury has forced their hand. What have you seen from Alvarez? And I mean, is there any reason of cause for concern? I think it's so early to even ridiculous to ask that question. But what have you seen from Alvarez besides the fact that he's just not playing consistently either, which probably isn't helping him very much?
What stood out to me, he looks perfectly fine behind the plate. He looks
You almost forget it's him catching.
Yeah. Yeah.
For all this, he's not ready to catch in the big leagues yet. I forgot he was catching.
Framing pitches fine, blocking pitches in the dirt. The first game that he played against Miami, they ran on him a little bit, but let me tell you, that's not going to be a consistent trend with Francisco Alvarez. His best trait is his throwing arm. I think the biggest problem is he's not playing. He's not playing enough. This is a guy that needs to be playing at minimum 3 days out of every 5. He should be catching every Carrasco, Peterson, and McGill start, and then I would sprinkle in some Scherzer. I think for now, I would probably keep Nito almost as Senga's personal catcher of sorts until Alvarez maybe gets a little more comfortable there. But look, the Mets sent Francisco Alvarez and Brett Baty and Mark Vientos down to Triple-A to start the season because they said they needed to get more reps. They needed to get more comfortable. They had player development benchmarks to hit. Well, part of that is the at-bats, right? And Alvarez comes up by nature of necessity because they didn't want to use a 40-man spot on someone like Michael Perez. So they decided to just call up the kid. You got to play him. That's what all these teams do. When you call up a top prospect, he cannot come up and play once or twice a week. That simply cannot be the case, especially with, Tomas Nido, great defensive catcher. He's giving you nothing at all offensively. And frankly, there's not upside to Tomas Nido offensively like there is with Francisco Alvarez. So to me, I think at best, this is inconsistent messaging from the Mets that it's important that this guy gets at bats. Then you call him up and then you don't want to give him the at bats. At worst, it's, something worse than inconsistent messaging.
Right. I think what's frustrating is there is really, forget ceiling. I don't even know what the floor is with Nito right now. And I like Nito as a backup catcher, a guy that plays one every 5 days or whatever it may be. And the Mets seem so afraid of the floor with Alvarez. And you know what, Joe? If he strikes out a lot at this stage of his career, but he gives you the occasional home run and he's not struggling behind the plate, what do you have to lose right now in this 9 spot? I mean, the Mets are borderline dreadful from 6 to 9. And when Canna-Bats fit, they're dreadful from 5 to 9. It's the truth right now. Listen, I like Tommy Pham a lot. I say that. Tommy Pham takes
He's been fine.
Tommy Pham has been really solid in the early going, but Tommy Pham doesn't play every day. And this kind of opens the door for the Syracuse Mets conversation, right? The whole, what do you have to lose when you look at the bottom of this lineup? I mean, how many times is the Mets going to get guys on base and they just can't, or they can't get guys on base when that part of the order is up? I mean, you look at Syracuse right now. Here's the very promising thing to me, Joe. The Mets' clear major league club problem is they don't have a lot of pop. They have an enormous amount of pop in the minor leagues right now. Ronny Mauricio, the most surprising one to me, and I don't care how good he was in the fall, I'm still surprised by this. Ronny Mauricio, 4 home runs in 10 games already, and this guy hits moonshots. He's batting .361. He's getting on base about half the time. OPS over 1,200. Baty, 3 home runs in 6 games. He's batting .391, and we'll have a long Brett Baty conversation. Mark Vientos, 3 home runs in 9 games. He's batting .333. The big 3 with Alvarez up with the big league club already. These big 3, I mean, there's no way around it, Joe. They are hitting the absolute tar out of the baseball right now. And I didn't expect Ronny Mauricio's name to even be in conversation to be with the big league club at any point this year. And I still don't. But this is all you could ask for with these guys, especially Vientos and Baty. They just seem like they're knocking down the door at every moment.
They've performed probably even beyond what my expectations would be. And they were pretty high going in, especially for Baty and Vientos. Mauricio was very much a wait and see for me. And I'm just like you, Connor. Mauricio has stood out to me the most. He leads all those guys in home runs by 1. I mean, it's 4-3. So it's obviously pretty close. But what has stood out to me is he's drawn 4 walks so far. And last year, he drew 24 walks in the entire season.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Big.
he's on a much better trajectory, and I don't think walks are going to be a big part of his game going forward. But if this is just a sign of his pitch selection improving, that is a massive sign for what his future holds, because he is hitting 116-mile-an-hour home runs. He is not getting cheated. I love everything I'm seeing from Ronny Mauricio. The problem there is he's still playing shortstop. And I don't understand why he is playing shortstop every single day still. You have to look at this and realize you have a potential guy to help your team on your hands. He needs to play somewhere else. If that's third base and Brett Baty gets some left field reps, fine. If that's, give him an outfield glove. I have said it on this podcast for the last year. Give Ronny Mauricio an outfield glove. Throw him in left field. He's a at least average to slightly above average athlete. I think he would translate just fine to the outfield. And until he's off shortstop, I can't take him seriously as a potential big league call-up unless Francisco Lindor gets hurt.
Yeah, and that's the last thing you want. And we know
Right.
that if that happened, Buck would play Luis Guillorme every day at shortstop. So it doesn't even matter. So, I mean, the bottom line is with Mauricio, he's 6'3", he's 222. He's hitting for power. And him playing short right now, to me, screams that maybe they were trying to build value with him at shortstop, but I'm not looking at Ronny Mauricio and going, wow, we have this great trade chip now. Because you look at the future of corner outfield and DH for the Mets, there's almost nothing there. Starling Marte's here for 2 more years, still a great player. Mark Canha's a free agent after this year. Eduardo Escobar is a free agent after this year. We believe Baty's going to be holding down third base, but I mean, there are corner outfield reps and DH reps there where if you got this guy with this kind of power that's hitting the ball in the air consistently in Ronny Mauricio, I'm not building up his value at shortstop. I'm building up his value for my own franchise. So the Mauricio
100%.
conversation, the
Yeah.
Mauricio conversation is exciting, Joe, because this was a guy that I think we both cooled on at one point, because it felt like he was striking out a lot. The power hadn't arrived yet. And we thought he's going to get too big to be a shortstop. And then they get Lindor. And it feels like Mauricio is fully back on the map now as a potential impact player within the next 2 years.
He's fully back on the radar. And, you know, I won't be surprised when top 100 lists start updating that Ronny Mauricio sneaks his way back into it. But the proper way to develop him at this stage would be develop him as if he's going to be a part of the Mets. So how is he going to help the Mets? And then if the trade deadline comes and they want to trade him to get Shohei Ohtani or whatever the case may be, you cross that bridge when you get there.
Yeah.
And then the Angels or another team or whoever trades for him, they can look at him and say he's a shortstop and they can put him back at shortstop. But while he's here, develop him as if he's going to stay here. And I think we're beyond the point of because it is normal. So I will say this from a development standpoint, like we use Jet Williams as an example. Jet Williams should play shortstop until he's in Double-A at least. You want acclimation to pro ball and get used to it and not thinking about a position as well as professional hitting professional pitching. Mauricio's getting close and close to the cusp of the big leagues. He's not needing to get comfortable anymore. So find an outfield glove, find a third base glove, find a second base glove. I don't know, but he needs to be playing somewhere else.
Yeah, Mauricio turned 22 years old about a week ago. So this is someone that, you know, we're getting close to crunch time where 22 is really young, but the days of Mauricio's years away have quickly surpassed us. And that's exciting. And, you know, we'll get into a larger Brett Baty conversation, I think, probably during the mailbag. So we'll get there on Baty. Everybody's wondering, everybody wants to know, when is Baty going to be here? I'm confident that Baty is going to be a big part of the 2023 New York Mets, because the guy hit all spring and now he's hitting and healthy again in the minors. And it's just, they're not getting anything out of the third base spot. So we'll get to Baty. Before we do have that conversation, Joe, let's look at the big league rotation right now and do a quick review. This is almost a pitch clock segment without the pitch clock here, Joe. And Scherzer, we'll start with Max Scherzer. Felt like it wasn't the Max we're used to in the first 2 starts of the season, especially the 6th inning troubles. We know that bulldog mentality with Max. But factoring in what you saw against the Padres, Joe, thumbs up or thumbs down right now for Max Scherzer?
Thumbs up for Max Scherzer. Velocity's there. Stuff is there. Missed some bats like he hadn't the previous couple starts. I think I think Scherzer's getting comfortable with the pitch clock, and we'll see that vintage Max Scherzer start is coming here soon. I don't know if it's going to be his next time out, but pretty soon I think we'll be recapping a vintage 6-7 inning, 11 strikeout Max Scherzer start.
The next one, I think I can give a thumbs up for both of us in Kodai Senga, but I got to ask you, Joe, you have followed this guy's career overseas. You knew he worked at Driveline. Has he been everything and more that you expected just from a pure stuff standpoint? Because what stands out to me is the confidence of this guy on the mound right away. Not scared of being here, not scared of being in the big leagues. I love everything about the mentality and demeanor of Senga to go along with that stuff.
The stuff checks out. I mean, it was an adjustment with a different baseball, with the different slope of the mound. Those are significant changes that he's had to adjust to. And man, I mean, it's up to 99. It's consistently 96, 97. He's able to elevate it and get swings and miss. Forget about the ghost fork. I mean, that is everything it was hyped up to be. You always hear about those pitches, right? Like, remember when Daisuke Matsuzaka came over and he had the gyro ball, which basically was a slider? And man, it wasn't really that type of pitch. The ghost fork, I mean, we talked about it, I think, on last week's show. 38 inches of vertical break and also getting 7 to 10 inches of horizontal. So good luck hitting it. So if he's able to command the fastball and he's using a cutter, sprinkling in a slider, if he could command those pitches, the ghost fork is going to put hitters away all year long.
For Carlos Carrasco, it feels like the hourglass is starting to quickly empty out. In 2 starts this year, he's thrown only 8 2/3 innings. He's given up 11 earned runs. He's walked 7 guys. He's given up 3 home runs. He's only struck out 5. He's not getting swing and miss from anybody right now, Joe. An unfortunate thumbs down for Carrasco. Is there any hope that he could bounce back and at least be mediocre this season?
It's still early enough that I think we don't have to act like his season's completely over. It's been as bad as you could get to start, so there's no way around that. It's a thumbs down for me, but if he can start getting those first pitch strikes like I talked about before, you can't be getting a first pitch strike rate in the 40%. Like, he was in the mid-60s, upper 60s over the last 4 years. If he gets back to there, I think there's at least a chance that he could give you some reasonable starts on occasion.
The last 2 here, the 2 guys that were like, well, how do we fit them into the rotation? And you blink and they open the season in the rotation. David Peterson, he's pitched to a 4.91 ERA through 3 starts. There has been some swing and miss stuff. He's got to keep the walks down. He's got 4.9 walks over 9 innings. Last year, he was at 4.1. It was a problem last year. It's gotten worse this year, but it was good to see Peterson bounce back. And then when you look at McGill, McGill is an obvious thumbs up from me here, Joe. He's somebody that loves pitching in April. He's healthy. He's ready to roll, and he's been phenomenal. I believe McGill now is officially 3-0 out of the gate to start the year, and he's somebody that is throwing strikes and just feels to be confident again as a starter.
McGill, big thumbs up, and I know we answered a mailbag right when the season was starting, and I said Peterson was better than McGill, and maybe that's not the case. I think Tyler McGill has definitely proven some people wrong. Like you said, the confidence is there. Locating his stuff. I mean, after he gave up the 2-run homer to Juan Soto in the last game of the Padres series, he basically went untouched for the rest of his outing. So I've been more than impressed with what McGill has brought to the table. Peterson's not like a thumbs up or a thumbs down. He's like a middle thumb. Like, he's kind of just been, he's been kind of okay. Like you said, the walks are a problem. They were a problem in spring training. In spring training, he didn't give up any hits, but he walked, I think it was like 8 guys in 11 innings or 12 innings. So he's got to cut that walk rate down. He's much like how I talk about Ronny Mauricio will never draw walks. David Peterson's never going to not issue walks. But if he could get back to that, if he could get to like a 3.7 to 4 walk per 9 with his swing and miss rate, and he doesn't give up consistent hard contact, I think you'd be getting quite a few good starts out of Peterson if he could do that.
I'm with you. He was effective last year, even pitching to that 4.1 walks over 9. So if you get that down just a little bit, you get the swing and miss stuff going again, you find your way out of trouble. That's just the way Peterson is. So he's a guy to monitor. And a reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel. or wherever you get your shows. We're going to take a quick 15-second break and be right back on the other side with our mailbag.
This spring, be transformed during the Cadillac Move Up sales event. This is your moment to step out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. Visit your Cadillac showroom today.
All right, welcome back. Time for the mailbag as we do every week. Lots of great questions sent to Joe at PSL to Flushing on Twitter. I am at Connor J. Rogers on Twitter. And let's get right back into talking about the kids here, Joe. The first one from JMD says, we talked a lot about bringing up Baty, Vientos, and or Mauricio, but assuming no trade, who leaves to create space for them? I believe Guillorme is the only hitter with an option left. Would they cut bait with Escobar considering his clubhouse presence and versatility?
So I think where we stand now, it's hard to envision promoting more than one of them. I don't think where we stand the roster space fits it. I would imagine a DFA of Tim LaCastro would probably make the most sense. I mean, I appreciate what he brings to the table, but he's speed and defense replacement. That's something I need
in April,
in August, September, when rosters expand. I don't need that for a whole season. Tommy Pham works just fine as the fourth outfielder, and he could play some right-handed DH. So for me, it would be Brett Baty up as soon as possible. I have said it for a month plus now. I've wrote about it on SNY.TV. Everywhere that I could talk about Brett Baty should have been the opening day third baseman, I did. And it obviously didn't pan out that way. And he had the little thumb inflammation, worked through that, just missed a couple days, came back, and has looked like nothing's been wrong. So to me, he is big league ready as a bat, even more so than Alvarez. I think Baty would come up and maybe not have quite as much inconsistency as I think Alvarez is going to here in the early going, just because his pitch recognition skills are a true plus tool that he has. Defensively, he's going to be fine at third. Like, I think everyone is freaking out about the defense, and I understand because the Mets over the years have forced some square pegs into round holes defensively. But Brett Baty's a third baseman. We saw flash plays in spring training. I've seen some plays in Syracuse, some flash plays. He's going to be just fine there. Will there be some ups and downs? Yes, because he's never going to win a Gold Glove. That's not the type of defensive player he is. But you call Brett Baty up, you throw him in the lineup, Escobar moves to the bench. He could play a little bit of everywhere, and you let Brett Baty run as the third baseman. I'm ready to do that right now. And, we'll see how long the Mets want to wait on it.
I'm with you. There's no denying it. And I think when you look at Baty, the trickle effect, I'm with you that it's LaCastro, because that's not something that teams carry April to July. They just don't in baseball. And I know a lot of people argue, well, in this era of the stolen base bonanza that we've seen, it's nice to have him, but even Pham's running a little bit as well. So I think when it comes down to it, it would be LaCastro, because say what you want about Escobar, but you like his experience when you get into the fall. And the Mets right now aren't really overloaded with right-handed DH options. And if they're not going to bring up Vientos, Escobar supplements that a little bit. He's a better right-handed hitter. For all his struggles overall, he looks more comfortable hitting from the right side of the plate against lefties. So there is still a role on this team for him, especially when you factor in that, he could play a couple different positions. So I don't think it'll be Escobar either. I don't think anybody is ultimately expecting that. This is another one from passionate Mets/Jets fan. And we talked about Mauricio a lot, but he asked, how does Ronny Mauricio's development at a position other than shortstop impact the Mets farm system? So, Joe, we took the angle of how it impacts Mauricio, but how does it impact, or how would it impact everybody else when you look at the big picture of this entire farm system? You're somebody that ranks these guys. You follow all levels of them since they're drafted. What would that do to the big picture if Mauricio is officially moved out of shortstop?
I think from where he'd rank on my top 20, he'd probably stay in the same spot. But I do think it would provide some certainty for some other guys. Like Brett Baty has played third base. Then the Mets were signing Carlos Correa. Now he's becoming a left fielder. And now Ronny Mauricio in spring training, when they asked about playing a different position, said he would like to play third if he played another position. So
It's problematic.
We had that conversation a month ago during spring training too on the show. Like, is the long-term Brett Baty in left and Ronny Mauricio at third? I think if Mauricio can expand to the outfield, which is where I think he actually does fit really well, that solidifies Brett Baty as a third baseman, solidifies Mauricio as a left fielder, solidifies Vientos as a first base DH. And I think from there, they'll have their versatility where you could play a couple different spots or whatever. But from a general perspective, you would have young players locked into positions that they can look forward to playing on a near everyday basis.
Without a doubt. And you just look at Mauricio, he falls into line as another right-handed at bat. He's a switch hitter, but another guy that can bat from the right side of the plate. And when you just factor it, like, the Mets are going to look very different next year. And we're not going to do the thing where we start the offseason in April, because this is an exciting Mets season. But when you talk about all these guys in the big picture, the Mets have a lot of expiring contracts this year. The Mets have just not figured out the DH spot since it's been a thing in the National League. I mean, when you look at it from that standpoint, there's a lot of different holes that are going to be open. And that's why these guys matter so much with the versatility and finding them a home, as you've really hammered home here, Joe. So it'll be interesting to track how all of them are used throughout the entire season. All right, this is the last one. We did the pod before the pod, but we have to do this. I think it's a really off the rails conversation for April of it's an exciting week for the Mets. It's been, but this one from Michael out of nowhere, and shout out to you, Michael, because we get duplicate questions like no other. Everybody wants to hear about Mauricio and Baty, and it's fun. Why not? But Michael comes out of nowhere, Joe, with does David Wright have an actual path to the Hall of Fame? Not sure when he's eligible. Or will he just be remembered as a Mets great?
So, like you said, Connor, it was the pod before the pod. There was an agreement on this part of the question, which was he is probably not going to be in the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame. He will surely be in the Mets Hall of Fame. And I said that on the pod before the pod. And that led us down a rabbit hole where I don't know where you're coming from, but Connor believes David Wright's number should never be retired by the Mets. And I was actually pretty stunned to hear you say that.
Yeah, the pitchforks came out for me. And let me say this. I think there's a world where I'm fine with it. But my argument was, number one, let me set the floor here. I am not a fan of just retiring numbers. Like, I think it's been drastically overdone by certain teams. One plays in New York. And it's not the Mets. And I think that the way I phrased it to you, Joe, and our producer, Jeff, was I'm also a fan of, like, you really got to limit how many numbers you retire decade by decade. And I understand that era of Mets baseball, when Wright came up and was a star, the Mets obviously had some good years. But there was also many years where the Mets were dreadful. And it's not David Wright's fault. I understand that. And Wright doesn't have the longevity aspect on his side because of how his career ended. But my argument was, and maybe this is a little too wishful or hopeful, but if this Mets team in the next 4 to 5 years wins a World Series, I am going in with the assumption that one of Francisco Lindor or Pete Alonso will have their number retired in Mets history. And being the stingy jersey retirer that I am, I think that would eliminate the idea of David Wright's jersey being retired in Mets history, because as much as people don't want to hear it and they don't like it, for like 80% of his career, Joe, and I know it's not his fault, but these things matter. Not a great era of Mets baseball, to be honest with you. So
yeah,
people are going to hate this take, and I understand I'm probably on an island with it. But I am a very stingy person when it comes to retiring numbers. I think there are members of this Mets team that got a good shot. DeGrom leaving actually helped David Wright a lot, because if DeGrom stayed, DeGrom would have been a no-doubter. Now that he left, I'm not even entertaining that conversation ever, and it gives David Wright some life here. But man, I don't think it wouldn't be a lock for me, personally.
I would say I think it should be a lock.
Okay.
There has not been a ton of Mets success in Mets history. So, I mean, if we're basing it off, they had to like win a World Series.
Don't set a low bar, Joe. Set a high bar. This is a new era.
They did win a pennant with David Wright on the roster.
Yep.
David Wright was the captain of this team. He was the face of the franchise, albeit, like you said, for a good percentage of the career, not a particularly successful franchise. I just don't know if you could ignore kind of this whole era of sorts, because you had Mike Piazza get his number retired. He more or less fizzled out with the Mets. What was it, 02, 03 or something? He left like before David Wright came up, Mike Piazza was gone. That whole 2003, 2004 till present day, just no acknowledgement. And I'm with you, though. Retiring numbers, the other side of town, they do it excessively. I'm not sitting here saying retire Carlos Beltran's number or retire Carlos Delgado's number, who were successful on the 06 Mets, or even Jose Reyes. I just think David Wright feels like a bit of an exception because of just how much he meant to this franchise in a time that this franchise was so bad, to your point,
fair.
Connor.
That's fair.
They were so bad. David Wright was like the bright spot of this team, and he took on everything for those teams. He faced the media every day while the Mets were winning 71 games a year. I think he warrants it, but I wouldn't be doing it imminently. Like, I don't want to retire David Wright's number in 2 or 3 years. You could give it some time before you do it, because the Mets have retired Keith Hernandez and Willie Mays and Jerry Koosman, I believe, since Steve Cohen has taken over. And I don't want it to become a yearly tradition of retiring numbers. But I think as we progress a few years in the future, David Wright deserves that 5 to be up in the rafters.
Listen, I don't think it's outlandish at all. And I think 99% of Mets fans want that as well. And if it happens, it's not like I'd be angry, because I love David Wright. Most of my favorite memories as a Mets fan growing up include David Wright, or David Wright is the focal point of those memories. And I think his representation of the franchise, which could be even more important from 2008 to 2013, like so many dreadful years, his representation of the franchise and still being a really good player matters so much. But yeah, the Mets are, I mean, right? Obviously, Willie Mays is retired, but you have Keith's number that went up. You said Koosman, Piazza, Jackie Robinson retired by baseball, Tom Seaver, Gil Hodges, Casey Stengel. It makes an interesting conversation, because when you say all those names, you're like, well, who from David Wright's era of Mets baseball? And that's a long time, a really long time. Like after Piazza, it's like it would only be him. And I'm just curious. I think these next 4 to 5 years will really dictate that. If this Mets team can't get it done with the stars they have now, especially with how long Lindor is going to be here and how long I think Pete Alonso is going to be here, it's fascinating, man. It really, really is. But we had fun with the conversation. It's not, there's no hate involved. I literally, unfortunately, sometimes live and die with the Mets. I love this team and I love the legends that come through here. And David Wright is absolutely one of them. But I am a stickler for retired numbers. So we'll see where it goes.
I appreciate you being stingy.
Someone has to be, Joe. We can't be giving these out left and right.
Yeah.
We need numbers left.
I think this conversation genuinely stemmed from a conversation you and I had on opening day when the Yankees carried Anthony Volpe on the roster. And we're just like, what number do they have to give him? 1 through 10's retired. Half of the
ridiculous.
20, just there's no numbers to issue. So you don't want to get to that point for sure. But like a lot of people want to retire Doc Gooden and Darryl Strawberry and guys like that. I don't need to retire those guys' numbers. But I think David Wright warrants it. And I think you're being maybe a little stringent.
I took it too far. I took the bit too far.
Yeah. But I do appreciate it. And I agree with your overall sentiment of let's not get into a habit of retiring numbers left and right. And just anyone who is good deserves to not have their number worn again. But David Wright, I think, just feels like an exception, just everything he meant for the franchise, especially during a time when, everything going on with ownership and just the way the team was. David Wright took so much on his back that I think throwing his number up in the rafters feels like a worthwhile thing for him. All
right. And with that, we are going to close today's show. Look ahead for the Mets They have 3 games in Oakland. Feels way too early of a baseball season for the Mets to be going to Oakland. I don't know why. It's just bizarre to me. The Mets will
I'm not going to be able to recap these games. They're on late.
No, you'll be in bed by the time.
Though the pitch clock gives me a much better chance to catch like most of it.
And Saturday and Sunday are at 4:07 Eastern time. So unless you're going to bed at 7:00, you will catch the end of these, which on Sundays with you, I wouldn't rule out. And then the Mets stay on the West Coast and play the Dodgers. So the next time we speak to you, we will be recapping their series against the A's. They will see old friend Trevor May, who things have not been too kind to him out of the gate, starting off with the A's. They will see a Dodgers team that obviously has been a powerhouse in baseball for a while. And then we'll be back with you. So, Joe, closing thoughts on today's show, the Do You Retire David Wright's Number in Mets History episode.
A few hours ago on Wednesday, before the final game of the Padres series, the Mets season was virtually over, according to a lot of people on the internet. But back-to-back series wins. Are things pretty? Not necessarily. Are things inconsistent on the offensive side specifically? Yep. And we're going to touch on that week after week. And that needs to step up as they move along in the season. But take wins when you get them. They've won, 2 series in a row. That's 4 out of 6. They've won 4 in a row. So we're doing okay.
Yeah, everything's going to be fine. And the offense can only get better, we believe, when you look at the numbers and you look at the track record of at least the guys in the 1 to 5 spots. I'm not going to bat for the bottom of this lineup, Joe. I will defer from that. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This spring, be transformed during the Cadillac Move Up sales event. This is your moment to step out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.